I guess we're ready to go, huh, Tom?
All set.
Okay. I'd like to start out by saying what an honor it is to be here with the Squaw Valley Property Owners Association, the Squaw Valley, but I like to think of it more as the Squaw Valley community. And especially to be here along with my two younger brothers, Paul Arthur and Osvaldo Encinas, who are people who have been, each of them, been great role models for me over a long period of time, although they might not know it. And we have to keep this short, so I'm going to start out not so much by telling particular stories, but by talking a little bit about what it was like to come into the valley as a 2-year-old in 1946, and to have very strong memories of all of that period in the history of the valley, which many of you may not share. I'm not. Osvaldo came, I know, in 1960, but I'm not sure when Paul came. 58. And 58. Oh, that was all way down the line by that time. But as you know, may know, I've spent a good deal of time in this house. As a matter of fact, I was here when this house was being built. This house was built by my mother and father and a couple of Paiute Indians who were a wonderful help. One of them actually used to, when we first came into the valley, and across the log bridge down here, which was the only bridge that was capable of being crossed on the way into the valley, used to camp here in the summertime with his family, and the woman would still weave baskets at the down where the compound property is, at the lower end of the meadow, and Dewey was one of them, and Weiss was the other one. I remember Dewey because Dewey was always the one that carried the big rocks. The foundations of this house are built of stone because in those days nobody was fancy enough. There was no such thing as ready-mix concrete, and nobody could afford to pour that much concrete anyway. So it was built of stones and mortar, just like an old country house, or a house in Argentina might be. It might still be built. This part, actually, this wonderful dining room, was in those days was the garage. So be careful over there. That that garage door is partially open. There's a rolling door, and there may be a couple kids come sliding right down. The snow in 1952 was so deep, was up here 12 feet deep, and so we came out the upstairs windows, and we found that we could come around to the front of the house. But we could never. The garage doors here were these great handmade wooden doors, very, very heavy, that were always coming off of the rails. So we could never get them quite closed, and so there was always a space over here of about 2 feet wide where you could come in the house, but also the snow could also come down and come in. So, but we walked around the house, and we found that there was actually a snow hole right next to the house where we jumped in and we just slid down and came right onto the garage floor. That was right there. You guys over here, if you listen carefully, you may be able to hear Pete Johnson selling some of the first lots that were sold in Squaw Valley, because this is where the little real estate office was. Right here. It was about a 12 by 12 real estate office carved out of part of the garage. You guys sitting right there, that's where I would have been working on my jumping skis and scouring them down with steel wool and then putting wrappings, which is a kind of Norwegian shellac that you put on the jumping skis that you have to do. You have to do that every time that you go to a jumping meet because the shellac comes off after a day of jumping. You guys over there, that's where the dryer was, and that's where our cat, who used to love to climb in the dryer because it was a warm place to sleep, one time climbed in and never came out again because somebody had to run the dryer. Who
was the one that turned the dryer?
Well, it wasn't Russell because Russell wasn't around yet. there used to be a stairway here up into the kitchen, which was just behind this big mirror here, and the dining room was over here. So that's a little bit about building this house. The main part of the house, as I said, things were just getting kicked off here in the valley, and things were everything was really happening on a shoestring. And this house, the main bulk of this house was two World War II surplus barracks units that came from Stead Air Force Base that were moved up here on a moving truck and then put on top of this foundation that built. The garage was built, stick-built in front. A year or two later after the house was built in 1947, 48, and the garage was added maybe 49, 50. I want to just talk a little bit about what it was like to come into the valley. As a 3-year-old, I still have strong memories, actually colorful memories about coming in at that age, about the Indians who were still living in the summer times at the at the lower end of the meadow, about coming up the 2-track dirt road, crossing the river, and the times we'd get stuck. Of course, you're all driving 2-wheel drive DeSotos and Chevy pickups and so forth in those days. I love going to Patagonia, Osvaldo, because I can pretend I'm back in the early 1950s or the late 40s. And so, I'm a person that believes that landscapes have intelligence, landscapes have awareness. And the landscape of Squaw Valley, as we know it today, was just then, in a sense, also just being born, or was also 2 or 3 years old, just like I was. And I've always felt that my life, my experience of my life, really was reflected in the growth of Squaw Valley. And the first 10 years, the 1950s, were a beautiful time. They were a time when the meadow was not ringed with houses or with roads or with pavement, with asphalt. Where days were spent in the meadow. This incomparable meadow, which we have. That's where we lived. Through these endless summers of the 1950s. Quiet, very little traffic. The valley also kind of grew up during that period, or started to grow up. And all of a sudden you come to a time, 1960, I get my first driver's license. Also the 1960 Olympics. I mean, not to mention the 1960. But after that, the driver's license to the 1960 Olympics, of course, everything changed. Everything was moving at a much faster pace. So we have the 1960s. Now, Osvaldo can speak a little bit to that, and certainly Paul can. So I'm going to talk about the 1950s. And believe it or not, I mean, you guys come up, you have a lot of fun here, you experience the lifestyle and all the nightlife in Squaw Valley and everything that we've got here. But believe me, I don't think I'm lying when I say that the 1950s were the most fun, the most active time I have ever seen in Squaw Valley. There was the beer garden at the lodge, and there was Boo. I mean, I think that Boo was short for bacchanalia or something like that, because that's what it was. It was, it's this period that Oakley Hall wrote The Pleasure Garden about, because this is what Squaw Valley was in those days. And it's not that it's not now in its own way, but certainly it didn't have the sense of simplicity that it had then. And also, of course, we didn't trust people who came up from somewhere else, like Sacramento or Auburn or something like that, or Patagonia. These were people who came up from, we used to call it, they came up from down below, You know, like where is that down below? You know, they're not really to be trusted, and really, and even we ourselves, the Poulsens, it took us a long time to be accepted here by the people of Lake Tahoe, who had lived here since the 19th century, whose families had been here since the 19th century, and whose families had piloted the steamer Tahoe and had created the incredible Tahoe Tavern Lodge and the casino where we always used to go for movies, and then we'd walk out on the deck afterwards outside of this 19th century building and watch the moon come up over the lake. These experiences don't even exist anymore. But this is the way. This was life in those times. Just a few weeks before that, I had been out in the meadow, out in the beautiful meadow out here, digging worms to fish with. But that was the end. That was, as I said, everything changed in 1960, and that's part of it. But one of the most beautiful parts of Squaw Valley used to be the meadow, which was located where the real true Olympic Village is right now. It was a unique little meadow set on the north side of where Squaw Creek comes down out of the mountains. And there's another little creek which you can't see now, but which came around the right side of a sugar loaf there, which made the most beautiful little place. That's where we camped. It was a place that was out of the way. It was a separate space in this valley. It was a very beautiful location. And we camped in surplus khaki army tents that had that wonderful smell of old khaki canvas. So yeah, I can still smell it.